So a few people may have noticed that I haven't uploaded videos for a couple months or so. I don't know the exact time frame. Basically, my editing computer broke, and it just took a while to have the money to try to fix it in the most cost-efficient way. And so I am back now. If you're watching this, I must be back. And I'm hoping to return to a weekly upload schedule. The first thing that I want to do is talk about the singles from the forthcoming Peter Gabriel album I.O. that came out in my absence. Now, if I remember right, the last song that I reviewed, last video I did actually before I shut down, was the song Road to Joy, which I was quite critical of. And honestly, I haven't really looked at the comments for that video. Nothing stopping me, I suppose. I could do it even with my computer broken, but I kind of got the impression probably a lot of people didn't. I'm assuming people probably didn't respond well to that video, if for no other reason than it had a fairly decently high number of views and really didn't generate any subscriber growth, which is kind of unfortunate, but, whatever. But, I do have to admit that that song left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. A certain amount of my criticism of it was predicated on disliking the song Kiss That Frog, which, I don't know, maybe other people are more fond of than I am. But it, it did kind of honestly leave me ready for a bit of a break from the I.O. singles and, ready to take a little bit of time off from that. And 3 songs have come out since then. And to my surprise, I'm actually pretty pleased with all of them. It's some of the most interesting material, some of the most effective material that I've heard from this album. And it's good to have that feeling, frankly. First thing that came out in my absence was the song So Much, which is a very straightforward, very affecting, really simply, minimally arranged piano ballad about aging and mortality. Now, obviously, those are subjects that have been a frequent preoccupation on this album, not surprisingly, I suppose. And this shares something with the other songs on that topic, particularly the title track, which is an understanding of the ways that beauty and sadness and life and death are woven inextricably together. I've heard it's an effect of aging that you understand that tie better, right? How dependent those things are on each other, how they're facets of the same thing. And that's such a common observation, the unity of life and death and sorrow and happiness. It's such a common observation that it can feel very trite, but I think as you get older, you go from an intellectual understanding of that unity to a more deeply felt, honestly felt one. Where am I in that process? Maybe about halfway through it. And So Much, it's not really a happy song or a sad song. It's not a despairing song or a triumphant song. It sits in this particular middle space that's quite effective. And, I appreciate that as a conceptual and emotional statement. I've heard comments from some people who think that the arrangement is uncreative, or that it would be more interesting to have a musical texture that sat in contrast to the lyric instead of mirroring it so closely. And, certainly if it had either of those qualities, I'm sure I'd appreciate them, but that possibility doesn't take away from the appreciation of what we do have. Now, I've written off the distinctions between the different mixes before, but one thing that I did notice in the Bright Side mix was this little hint of bass guitar lined up very neatly with the piano. It's quite minimal, but it's a lovely bit of texture. It has a searching kind of quality. The fret noise makes it feel nicely organic. And if that layer is in the Dark Side mix, then it's sonically invisible. I wasn't able to pick it out at all in listening to that alternate mix. And, I've said before that the differences between the mixes are mostly kind of minimal, surface level, not that important to the real impact and construction of the song. This is one case where that detail, I suppose it, again, still is not important to the kind of basic impact and real weight of the song. But it meant a lot to me hearing it, and it's one place where the distinctions between the mixes actually seem significant. The next release was a song called Olive Tree. Now, sonically, a lot of aspects of this remind me of something from the 80s, actually. That open guitar line, that simple kick drum, the way it propels the song forward. Those horns actually feel a lot like something Phil Collins would have done maybe on But Seriously. I've got the water. There's a bit of, 21st century squishy noise making, but on the whole, the vibe here is actually surprisingly retro. Now, I don't think it sounds like what Gabriel himself was doing in the 80s, but it almost has the vibe of maybe like a solo Steve Winwood track or something. And overall, I think this piece has some of the drive and the celebratory quality that Road to Joy tried to pull off, but working in a much more effective way. I like the contrast between the dark minor key verse and the brighter, more celebratory bridge and chorus. They give the song a sense of balance that works really well. Lyrically, there are images of things like rebirth and connection that have become, I think, standard themes for this album. There's a mix of some nicely calibrated imagery with some kind of weird stuff. I like the line, new life weeps its way out through the coil. I like the line, there's a shark pushing through the swaying weeds. Predator and prey sort out their needs. There's a line, here in this helmet I can read other minds and scan all the thinking, all the juice I can find. Not sure what that's about, some kind of VR telepathy or something. Has kind of a sci-fi quality. It suggests that the song is built around some bigger scenario that I can't really parse at the moment. So there's kind of an enigmatic quality there that I do actually appreciate. It's not going for the obvious. The third track that I missed reviewing was Love Can Heal, which is the calmest and the most meditative song we've had thus far, and relatively simple in its arrangement compared to some of the others. The whole thing sits atop this kind of pulsing bed of electronics, but the first lead sound that you hear is a cello. That cello sound does come back in throughout the song. And, one of the recurring thoughts I've had about this batch of material is that the synthesizers, the electronic textures that are being used here, the way sound is kind of being built with those tools, often it feels a little generic, it feels bland, it doesn't have the character of what he was doing with, much more basic rudimentary synthesizers in the 80s. Hasn't really given the album a distinct sonic character. And, it's always a nice change when there's something more organic and human at the forefront. The use of the cello here really brings that out in a good way. The vocal melody is very nicely well written. It's immediately memorable. On the chorus, we have a secondary vocalist who's arranged in some nicely lush harmonies. There's a little detail I appreciate here, that upward love in the extra layer on the third repetition in the first chorus. That's a great little detail, I like that a lot. The title is maybe a bit too direct, but some of the lyrical imagery is really creative and vivid and kind of lingers in the mind. This kind of song title, this kind of lyric idea, this kind of mood, it could be handled in a way that's genuinely moving and soothing, or, it could end up a little bit more as kind of new agey pablum, essentially, depending how well it's done. And remarkably enough, I think this falls on the correct side of that gap, although I will say that the whispering of Give In to Love at 4:30 is maybe a bit much. So this is a very well-written song with some very nicely chosen sonic textures. It's one of the better things on the album. Now, the final track list has been released. To my knowledge, we don't really know yet which of the mixes will be considered the definitive versions, but we are pretty close to having the final album, I suppose, available and in our heads. I'm going to hold off on offering any kind of summary thoughts about the whole thing until I've had a chance to, listen to it in the definitive mixes in the correct order, but I was a little bit harsh on the last song that I reviewed, and I'm feeling more positive about these now. All right, well, maybe not the most thrilling video for me to come back on. I don't know if I had too much interesting to say about those, but I did feel like I needed to put a little more positivity in the world when I was so harsh on Road to Joy. Although, to be fair, that song does suck, so it wasn't my fault. I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you again soon.